Let's think about major depressive disorder from a trauma frame and how it might reflect what, what we're, reflect trauma. So when we're talking about major depressive disorder, we're talking about changes in mood, obviously, but also changes in how we're thinking about things, our motivation to do things that we used to enjoy, and our physical systems. So things like how we're eating, um, how we're sleeping, whether we're, you know, kind of twitchy or unable to move. So from major depressive disorder, we're talking about 5 or more of these 9 symptoms. They have to have been present during the same 2-week period and represent a change from previous functioning. So if this is just the way you always are, that's how you are, rather than depression. And at least one of those symptoms is either uh, depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day, or a markedly diminished interest or pleasure in all or almost all activities. So number 2 is there in part because not everybody recognizes and identifies themselves as depressed. And so this gives us another way of looking at things. It's followed, or we're seeing some somatic symptoms, significant weight loss or change in appetite, insomnia, difficulty sleeping, or hypersomnia, sleeping too much, agitation or retardation, just can't move, fatigue or loss of energy. And then we're seeing these cognitive pieces, the inability to think or concentrate or make decisions, and recurrent thoughts of death or dying. In addition, we're seeing that major depressive disorder causes clinically significant distress or impairment. So, for example, it may interfere at work or at school, may not be able to get up for class, whatever. It's not attributable to the physiological effects of a substance. You know, if you're unable, for example, um, to get up into school because you've been abusing barbiturates, that's not depression. Not better explained by another disorder, and never been a manic or hypomanic episode. So bipolar disorder looks like major depression at some points, although there would be a manic or hypomanic episode. And with major depressive disorder, we see a much greater risk of trauma among people with major depressive disorder. Similarly, survivors of war report high levels of depression and suicidality. Unpredictable and uncontrollable traumatic events, and that unpredictable, uncontrollable is something that's associated with a lot of trauma. So, for example, child abuse. You don't know what your parents are going to do today. Or when we're looking at assault, you're walking down the street, no problems, and someone jumps out. So those uncontrollable, unpredictable events may lead people to experience fear, loss of control, helplessness, hopelessness, things that are often associated with and precede depression. Specific trauma events associated with depression include physical and sexual abuse, uh, natural and human-made disasters, and exposure to combat and terrorism. So overall, there's an increased risk of depressive disorders and suicide attempts among people with a greater number of traumatic childhood experiences. What we're seeing here is, in general, this looks similar in children and adults, but children may be irritable rather than, you know, crying. There may also be a failure to make expected weight gain, like Diego. There's often a relationship between anxiety and depression, in terms of this negative affect, negative mood. And we're seeing that most people who are depressed are also anxious, although not everyone who's anxious is depressed. Again, one of the mechanisms by which we may see this relationship between anxiety and depression is in terms of avoidance. And, so there are things that we can do, including not avoiding. Kristen Bell talks about her own experiences with depression, and, it may be easier to sort of pull some of this apart by looking at what she's saying. So let's stop and think, how might depression be seen through a trauma lens? What kinds of problems is it trying to solve? What is this saying about how this person is looking at the world? What are they saying about whether they believe that they can have any impact on the world? Again, doesn't mean that trauma is the only cause of depressive symptoms. We're seeing a lot of different kinds of causes of depression, including hormones, and including some genetics, lots of different things. But think about the role of trauma. And with that, I'm going to say, have a good day. Take care. Bye-bye.